We can cuddle.
And I'm sorry again, I have to say I'm a little distracted, so what
You're representing
I know,
education. The prompt is, what is your
Yeah.
experience with the Department of Education? What are your suggestions now?
You're,
And
oh,
and then we're going to talk about asking my first question is going to be like...
like during the session?
So is that okay?
Okay.
Is that going to stay up behind
Thanks for the heads up.
Is that going to stay up behind us the whole time?
Do you want to take it down? Oh, it distracted you?
No, it's fine. I just thought, I'm glad to see there's no shadows.
yeah. Good little extension.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is something.
How many
that we take
boogers?
for
Do I have any food in my tea? Am I
I don't
good?
like slides. but
My
I'm
skin
good.
feels really dry.
I'm trying to.
Is our mic on? Test. Bueller?
Are we on screen? On
You can hear us?
Zoom? Okay.
Okay.
I don't think these
All
are
right.
these buttons. I don't-
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today on the Aspire. Our Aspire Center is offering a panel on navigating federal funding. My name is Veronica Irvin. I'm an associate professor here in the College of Health. And we had this plan months ago to have this panel with exciting people discussing federal funding. We didn't quite expect to be in the situation we're at now, and I want to recognize that when my colleagues decided to join us, it was a different picture a few months ago. So they're going to be giving a little update about what they know about their different institutes. We're going to begin with Dr. Perry Heistad. He's going to be talking about the National Institutes of Health. We'll next be going to Dr. Megan McClellan. She'll be discussing the Department of Education. Both of these have been in the news recently and going over different structure changes. So just realizing that it's a very timely process and things are changing quickly. We'll be closing with Dr. Allison Myers, and she'll be discussing USDA and SAMHSA funding as well. They'll each provide a brief overview about what these organizations generally fund, the general process of the funding procedure, and some examples of their work, perhaps, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. Sound great? All right, so again, thank you for joining us today. We're going to begin with Dr. Heistad and the National Institutes of Health.
Awesome. Thanks, Veronica. Okay, so like Veronica mentioned, there's been a lot of changes recently. So I'm going to start off with describing NIH, how it used to operate, and then what we know now. And so things are changing a lot. I don't think we actually know what things are going to look like going forward, but we can be strategic in terms of how we submit grants and keep our work moving forward. So the National Institutes of Health is actually made up of 27 institutes currently. And so these range from the National Cancer Institute, the National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences, which we submit a lot of grants to. So 27 different institutes, and what's important to recognize is that each institute is different. So each institute has its own strategic plan, right? It has its own mission, it has its own goals. And so when we submit a grant, they are not funding our grant out of the goodness of their hearts, right? They're funding our grant to help them meet their mission, right? To help them meet their goals. So when you're submitting to NIH, and I'd say for any institute, you want to read their strategic plan, right? What are their goals? What do they want to fund? What do they want to accomplish? And you need to make sure that what you're submitting fits into that, right? That's the first thing you need to make sure you do when you're trying to select what institute do I want to submit to. Something else that is really important to look at is something called pay lines. So pay lines are basically and they're typically based on percentiles. So a pay line might be 7th percentile. And so that would mean that for that RFA, for that institute, they're going to fund grants that fall below that pay line. So if you're in the top 7% of grants, you are going to get funded. That pay line can vary from 5th percentile all the way up to 25th percentile. And this is driven by how much money that institute has and how much money is being dedicated to a specific topic area or for a specific research area. And so when you're being strategic, right, so the Alzheimer's and related dementia got a ton of money allocated from Congress. Their pay lines were up to 32 percentile. You look at other institutes where they might be at a 5th percentile. So if you can frame your grant to be dementia-related research instead of something else, you want to do that, right? That is going to give you a much higher success of being funded. The other important thing to consider when you're submitting a grant is what study section or review section it's going to go to. And so review sections are not institute dependent. So I submit a grant to a review section, it gets reviewed and it gets scored a percentile. The percentiles are specific to that review section. So I submit, I get a 17th percentile. If I then had NIEHS, environmental health, attached to this grant as the institute I wanted to fund it, that is not getting funded. The pay lines for R1s in NIEHS are 7. If I had NIA, the National Institute for Aging, attached to that grant, right? So in that grant, I stressed the health outcomes more than the environmental exposures I was focused on. The pay line for that institute is currently 17th percentile. So it goes to the same study section, but how you frame that grant, if it's more related to aging and outcomes rather than exposures, has a much better chance of getting funded. So that's something really, really important that actually took me a couple years too long to realize in terms of why am I doing this, right? Like I have a much better chance of getting funded if I'm more strategic in terms of how I'm framing my grant. So that's how NIH used to operate. Things have changed a lot now, and I have a couple grants pending. Talking to program officers, what they are trying to figure out, and everyone's trying to figure this out, right? So program officers, staff at these institutes. First of all, strategic plans are changing. So those are disappearing from websites. They're being updated. We don't know exactly what those are going to look like. But the guidance now is to make sure you are following the recent executive orders that were released. So the executive orders around DEI, around releasing America's energy, have very explicit restrictions on what can be funded. And so when you're writing your grant, the title, the narrative, so you have a short paragraph, and then you have an abstract, which is a half-page abstract that is meant more for the public rather than the specific aims that's being reviewed by the review panel. Those are public-facing. So those 3 things go into the NIH reporter. Those are on the internet. And that's where you need to be very strategic in terms of how you're framing your research and the type of language that you're using. So here I would say I would hope that our values and the research that we want to do is not changing. We are continuing forward with the things that we know need to be done. How we're presenting that can change. There's no point submitting a grant that you know has 0% chance of getting funded, right? That's just a waste of time. So being strategic on how we frame our grants and the language we use is what we need to be doing right now. And so it's a very fluid situation. We don't know how things are going to look in next year's budget. But I think it's being strategic and submitting grants and seeing what happens. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Great. Thank you, Perry. We'll do questions at the end. We're going to go again through each of the different institutes. So thank you, Dr. Hystad, for describing NIH, National Institutes of Health. We're now going to go to Dr. Megan McClellan about the Department of Education and her experience with funding and any ideas about right now, which I know is changing every minute almost. Dr. McClellan.
Hi. So I'm going to quickly give a summary of IES, which is the institute that I'm most familiar with, and couch it within the current situation. IES is the Institute for Education Science. It is the NIH arm of the Department of Education. It has a very similar people that apply for grants to NIH and are interested in educational research with very rigorous designs, randomized controlled trials. For example, cost effectiveness analyses are required. The funding rates are 5 to 8%. It's very low. So that's a typical kind of a similar to an NIH kind of, depending on the institute, obviously. It was started as an independent, nonpartisan, totally independent of Congress in 2002 by Bush, the first President Bush, to increase the rigor of educational science research. The very extremely rigorous research that's been done in the last 25 years. In general, there's different centers. I just summarized, the website is still currently up. They fund educational science research. They evaluate federal programs. They support evidence-based policies and practices, and they collect and report education statistics, although that has now been stopped. So, and they have totally objective, separate scientific peer review that the program officers are not part of. So it's different than like NSF, for example. There's different, I'll just quickly say, there's like the National Center for Educational Research, which is NCER, which is typically where my grants have been funded. There's also has been in the past, but is apparently no longer will be, National Center for Educational Statistics. This is like our national report card. Apparently that's not of interest, and to know where we are in this country compared to other countries. So that is not happening. The grant structure, I'll just say in the past, is really, they used to have a really fantastic structure of grants. It was like, first you do these exploration grants where you identify, the idea is you identify what they call malleable factors, okay, that are going to impact and influence children's educational outcomes, okay? So that's called an exploration grant. In the past, they used to have goal numbers, goals 1 through 5. If you had a goal 1, it was an exploration grant. And you could use existing data. It was a great one. And you could apply for, these were like up to $1.5 million for 4 years or something like that. And you could identify these malleable factors. And then in a goal 2 or a development grant, what you do is you kind of, you test out the promise using those malleable factors, right? Now, this is like the ideal, right? I didn't go through all these steps, but we already had, I'll tell you in a second what we did. But you identify them, after you identify the malleable factors, you apply for a development grant, you evaluate and you develop and iteratively develop the promise of an intervention, okay, with a small-scale randomized trial at the end, typically. It doesn't always have to be an RCT. But, again, there's this really incredibly strong emphasis on rigor at this institute. And so very strong focus on randomly assigning kids to almost the, again, it was like that was a lot of what we were told we should do. And that's changed somewhat. Well, it's changed a lot right now. But that was the idea. Once you had demonstrated the promise of an intervention, okay, then what they call an underpowered RCT, then you could apply for an efficacy grant, which is a scale up. That's a large scale randomized trial, okay, where you're testing the effectiveness and scale of your intervention in everyday educational settings, okay? You can still have, so that's kind of quickly, and then that's a goal 3, a goal 4. They've changed a little bit, but again, it was even like a bigger scale up. And then actually goal 5 used to be a measurement grant, which is a little separate, but you want to figure out how to develop measures that can really be used in educational settings that are reliable, valid, and are very strong, reliable, valid measures. So our research has focused on, overall, the research we've done has focused on the measurement and interventions to promote, to measure self-regulation and executive function processes in children. These are cognitive skills that are related to how kids do in school and in life. So how do you measure those in reliable, valid, ecologically valid ways? And how do you improve those with intervention? So in this goal structure, I sat on a review panel at this institute for 9 years. And what I got very familiar with the goal structure with these grants. And what I would say is we got like a development grant, right? For we have a red light, purple light intervention where we had already some evidence. Again, preliminary data was important to demonstrate that this is something that has malleable factors. We already had done that kind of work. Then we applied and got a development grant for $1.5 million. And then that led us, we had promising results at the end of that from our underpowered RCT. Then we published that work, presented it, and that led us to the current efficacy grant that we have, which is supposed to be a 5-year, $3.8 million grant. But it's a bigger grant, but the point there is to then test out the efficacy of this intervention at scale, at a higher scale, with a randomized trial. So currently we have over about 1,000 Jennies here, 1,000 kids in our study with almost 100 classrooms. So that's a little bit, that's the scale we're talking about. Sorry, I can't see far away, which is why I put my glasses on, but I'm like looking back and down. And then the goal 5 was the measurement grant, which we had 2 of, and that's to develop a measure that we have been working on called the head, toes, knees, shoulders task. Again, it's a 5-minute game that doesn't require materials. It's in 31 languages. It's used all over the world. It takes 5 minutes, and it predicts how kids do academically. So it's a very scalable, easy to use. We just got a Gates Foundation grant to continue some of that work, which is what I would suggest, by the way, diversify your funding. Right now, I'm just going to say, again, the funding rate has been about 5 to 8%. The scoring is different than NIH. The pay lines, the scoring is a totally different thing. It's like a 2 and below, okay? The funding line usually for IES has been a score of 2 or 0. 1 to 2, it basically is in the score fundable range. Okay, the current situation, if you haven't seen the news and you haven't heard, is that they are proposing to dismantle the U.S. Department of Education, including IES. And I just talked to my program officer this morning. We're in year 4 of our five-year efficacy trial. And we're talking about, I have a performance report. Our annual report is due in a few weeks. And, guidance that we've gotten is we continue, I will say that they are just, I have just the most respect for those program officers. I just cannot tell you, having been funded in the last 12 years, how nonpartisan, how straightforward, how they are guided by the rules set out in Congress. There is no other conversations that are any way, one way or the other. They just say, this is what the law says that is mandated by Congress, not the president. The Congress has mandated this. This is what you have to report on. This is the guidance. There are laws that we are responding to. So when we went through, and they are reviewing not just those public-facing documents, they are actually reviewing annual reports. And so, the guidance that we've received is that you have to really demonstrate the importance of this work. Like, for example, if there's no continuation funding for the 5th year of this project, it will be incredibly wasted $3 million of federal money because we won't actually be able to assess whether or not this intervention worked. Incredibly wasteful and ineffective and inefficient. Sorry, it will be very inefficient. So but it is our job as researchers to demonstrate in very, assuming that the people doing the reviews have no scientific background at all, that they are reviewing for, you have to be able to translate what you talk about in very straightforward language, how the work you're doing is effective, how it's important, why it's important. And I think this is just good practice for all of us, because in any day situations, and especially in the work we do as scientists, I think we have not done a very good job. I can also speak to the previous IES work. There's a big, huge gap between the scientific evidence that is extremely rigorous around what we know improves children's educational outcomes and some of the practice that is occurring in school districts around this country that is not connected. And part of that is really the researchers' faults. Now, some of it is because we were never funded for dissemination efforts. So it was like your end of your grant, and then somehow you're supposed to have no money. There's no money for you to actually disseminate and share your results widely. So that's on the researchers, and we now have to do that. We have to do cost effectiveness analyses to talk about the cost benefit of this work. I mean, we have done some initial analyses that shows that, you know, basically for $23 a child, there's an increase of like a huge increase in kids' behavior, behavioral, positive behavior, self-control. Okay, I'm not saying that very clearly, but you know, we already are getting really strong evidence that this is a cost-effective situation. And so there's now requirements in our grants where we have to start demonstrating this, but it has been, I think, a while in coming that we have not effectively translated the work. And so now we are being told, and it's required in our grants, if we are able to continue this work, that you have to demonstrate that. And I would just say the more you can translate the work you do, the better and the more effective and the more fundable it will be. I'll stop.
Great. Thank you, Dr. McClellan, and I appreciate both the historical and the current updates for educational research. Next, we'll pass it to Dr. Allison Myers, and she will talk about USDA and SAMHSA funding.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay? You all have set me up really well. I'm going to just give a couple of comments on what we've learned so far to date. Perry talked about making sure you understand the goals and objectives and the mission of the organization. It's imperative, right? Exactly right. And so, yeah, do your homework. You also talked about being strategic. Yes, that's another one. Megan, you talked about telling a compelling story. I'm not sure we're as good as a writer as we should be. You have to be able, when you're thinking about applying, I know I'm supposed to talk about USDA and SAMHSA, but you can't write boring. My mother, so I'm the daughter of 2 English teachers, and my mother would say dry old junk. Right? You cannot put forward dry old junk. I don't care what your topic is. If you're not telling a story that means something to someone, the reader has to be able to pick up what you're putting down. It's not about you being the smartest person on the planet. It's about the reader being like, yes, I get this. I'm in it. I know why it matters. I know why it's important for the world and not just for, right, your journal article, your dissertation, your grant. So I can't say enough good about that. And I also just want to comment on laws versus executive orders, and then I'm going to tell you some good news coming out of SAMHSA. It's a great time. I'm a person, so I work in extension. Anybody know what extension is? Okay, so you know that we're like out in the counties working with people all over the state. I often say that I'm a purpler. Right? That's a political reference. We serve all Oregonians. I don't care whether you're red or blue. Health means something to you, and it's my job to show up on your behalf and to make sure that our resources in the state of Oregon are used to promote your health and well-being. It's a great time to be really clear on what the difference is between an executive order that comes out of the administrative branch and something like a policy that comes out of Congress. So if you haven't brushed up on your civics lately, please do that. Take advantage of that. And the courts obviously are working very hard. We're getting those emails all the time about EO executive orders versus right court injunctions and things like that. And so much of this was created by Congress. It will take an act of Congress to undo it. EOs can only go so far. I'm not an expert. I know just enough to be dangerous. and who to call, and I would encourage all of you to do the same. Let me tell you a really good story that's happening out of SAMHSA. SAMHSA is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. I do not consider myself a researcher. I'm an applied researcher at best, really a practitioner. These are grants that are very different from what Perry and Megan have talked about. I don't know who reviews them. I don't know what the pay line is. I've never received feedback on my submission like I have on NIH grants, right? But SAMHSA is about, let me make sure I got it written down. I prepared. So SAMHSA's mission is to lead public health and service delivery efforts that promote mental health, prevent substance misuse, and provide treatments and supports to foster recovery while ensuring equitable access and better outcomes. I got that from their website at 4 a.m., okay? They're still saying equitable outcomes. Their work is all around preventing overdose, enhancing access to suicide prevention and crisis care, doing prevention. I want you to hear that word. It applies to a lot of folks in the College of Health without regard to discipline. Promoting resilience and emotional health for children, youth, and families, integrating behavioral and physical care, and strengthening the behavioral health workforce. So they do a lot of work. I think I do want to recognize we've been successful in bringing in SAMHSA dollars in recent years. Sandy Phibbs in our college, Dusty Linnell in our college, Ivan Estrada, who's in the room, have all worked on these, so it's not just mine. But what I want you to know about SAMHSA is that there's an example of something called the Rural Opioid Technical Assistance Centers. We call it ROTAC. We are one, together with Washington State University, where we're working to improve prevention, treatment, recovery, harm reduction, the whole spectrum with regard to opioid misuse and overdose in Region 10, which includes Alaska and Montana and Washington. I think I have those right. And for years, months now, we've been worried that there would only be one national center rather than the regional centers. Come to find out, as of yesterday morning, no, there will be regional centers. We're not losing our funding. Rather, these regional centers came about during the first Trump administration. They were thinking of being consolidated under the Biden administration. They are now back to being regional centers under the second Trump administration. So that's positive news, right, for our region. The other thing I want to bring up about current situation is to remember that, I have the experience of working as a staffer in the Senate during the first Trump administration. And I can tell you that I worked in a bipartisan way across the aisle on policy that did a lot of good. The 2018 Support Act was one of them. It brought gobs of money at the state and local level to do overdose response. Now we are seeing declines, not totally in Oregon, Ivan might correct me, but at least nationally in overdose rates. That's coming from initiatives that started with acts of Congress during the first Trump administration. So I just want to make sure that we make that clear. All of the SAMHSA grants, if you're interested in any of these issues and you're looking at the grants that they offer, they're lower amounts of money from ranges of like $125,000 a year over 4 or 5 years. We have one of those. It's called Mental Health Awareness Training, MHAT we call it. We also have gotten larger grants that are $1 million over 2 years that then give you a no-cost extension. They're really practice-oriented. You have to have a good logic model. You have to make sure you know what you're doing, right? Again, it goes back to the story. You've got to be able to be clear about what is it that you're going to do. We're using the science that other people are creating. We're doing in practice what we know works, which is right, matters a lot. You've got to be able to hang out on grants.gov, right? I don't think that's going to be news to anybody. Know what's there. It's all listed on grants.gov. You want to become really fluent with your agencies of interest. And then in the interest of time, I'll be really fast about USDA. It's the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Since 1914, the Smith-Lever Act formalized the Extension Service, which meant that the USDA and specifically the National Institute of Food and Agriculture makes money available for cooperative extension, which is about bringing the expertise of the university, no matter what it is, to community and vice versa. I want you to know that there are lots of mechanisms that are interesting or should be interesting for everybody in our college. Children, Youth, and Families at Risk, Sustainable Community Projects, SIFAR is a mechanism that's tried and true. Right now, their website says that they're all under review. The website also says that they're all coming out, right? That we'll keep seeing these 2 and 3 year, $200,000 to $500,000 initiatives that do really great things in partnership and community. So, rural health and safety education competitive grants. We've got 2 or 3 of those under our belt at this point, doing really cool substance use and mental health work out in remote Oregon and frontier parts of the state. There are AFRI, Agricultural and Food Research Initiative, education and workforce development around early learning matters. There's farm and ranch stress assistance, which has anything to do with stress in rural areas. There are nutrition incentive programs if you're a nutrition or public health or health promotion person. There's disaster education. And so I mostly want to say when I talk about these other agencies, at a time when NIH or the Department of Education, when it feels like the things are going to hell in a handbasket, like look other places and diversify your funding. Our team gets a lot of resource from the state legislature. We get a lot of resource from the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, from CDC, private gifts from foundations and other health systems. So I know that success metrics are different depending on the position you find yourself in, but you really do want to think about diversifying your revenue streams and your funding portfolio. I hope I didn't go on too long.
No, great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Myers. And I learned something new. I didn't realize you don't get feedback on SAMHSA grants. That's interesting. Yeah.
If we've gotten feedback, I've completely missed it.
No.
Has
That's so interesting.
I mean, I
You don't miss that.
No, yeah, no, I know. Right. No, I appreciate. I like hearing
this,
this.
but yeah, nothing.
That's great. I like hearing the similarities and the differences between the group.
Yeah.
Now is our time to open it up for questions. Do we have questions from the audience here in person? And are we accepting questions online, Dixie? No questions online. Do we have questions in the audience? Oh. Can they not hear this microphone? Oh, I'm going to walk over to them. Okay, great. Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to be the runner. Dun, 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 dun. The walker, the slow walker.
Can I say one really important
Yes.
thing while you walk to a question?
Yes.
I cannot tell you the number of times in my life that somebody will find the RFP opportunity and send it to me and be like, hey, we should do this, and they haven't read it and they're not eligible. And so that is another, like, rule number 1 is read the eligibility requirements for the love of all that's holy.
Thank you. Good points. We're going to pass it to Dr. Molly Kyle for our first question.
Thank you. This is actually really helpful, I think. Looking around, I'm seeing a lot of kind of new researchers, either students or postdocs and things like that. So I'm wondering if you can, A, tailor some advice specifically to that weight class with regards to getting their first grant, including any courses that you might know, because I heard a lot about understanding how to communicate your science as well as rigorous study design, and in some ways across disciplines. So we do kind of silo some of our education in different programs. So if you could speak to just that, how do you prepare yourself if you're still a student or a postdoc in order to get your very first grant, and maybe even tell your own stories there a little bit too of the first funding.
I'll take so like starting out, I think it's important to start building a track record, and you'll often hear sort of success leads to more success. And so starting off small, even with, right, maybe it's a college or university scholarship. There's center training grants. So OHSU has the Osler training grant. the success rates of those are much, much higher than if you go to apply directly to NIH for their training grants, for example. So thinking about applying for things locally and then sort of being more ambitious for what you're applying to, I think is a good sort of way to build success. Pass it to you.
Okay.
I'm thinking about the interdisciplinary one here.
Yeah. so I think you have to be kind of scrappy, and I applied for every single pilot grant I could when I was starting out, and that was super important because they were small, they were internal. You can apply for dissertation grants. I wouldn't apply for, the big federal national ones are really competitive. Look for other smaller regional grants, fellowships, dissertation awards that help fund your work. Again, how do you establish your track record? Well, you publish, right? But you also you need to get little bits of money to support like a small study where you get some pilot data. That leads to some good publications. That leads to some good evidence. You're onto something. Then you can start applying. Like I just did that over and over. It took me a while to get my first grant, right? And so I think that applying for dissertation awards, analyzing existing data sets, they still are there. I'm thinking at University of Michigan, right? We have places. Don't just look to federal sources. Look to other places where we are housing these kinds of data sets still. They're being saved. And so that you can analyze really important questions, right, that are policy relevant and also very timely. Yeah, that's what I would say.
I can't remember my first grant. I spent a lot of years in my later 20s after I finished an MPH working in a consulting firm where we had to raise all of our revenue. I've been soft money funded most of my career, and we had to tell a really good story. And the number of times, I was just talking about my boss, Kevin Leibel, who was just this morning, he was so hard on me on conceptualizing ideas in a way in 2 pages or less and then putting a price tag on it. So for me, in my experience, it has been about, what is it that you want to do and fitting that, like seeing through the clutter and making this really relevant case for something that meets a health need, right? Or a need that you see meets the funder's need, meets sort of what makes your heart sing. So for me, it's all been in the story. And yeah, I've never had an NIH R01, is that what they're called? R1. I've been wanting to, I spent lots of years wanting things that weren't for me, I would say. And I have the list of people who've decided to give money to my team is fascinating. And so I think that's another part of it too, is it's not don't be too proud to beg, but it's don't be too proud to engage who wants to engage with you. We just took money from the beverage associations to be able to figure out undergraduate internships, right? I don't want tobacco money. I don't want alcohol money. These are not alcohol people. They are sugar-sweetened beverage people, sort of, right? I'm not taking pharma money. I have boundaries, but I think that's the other part, too, is that, it's okay to find resources where you can find them and then work towards, the big dog. Yeah.
But in the current state, I would not have that as your end game anymore. Yeah, honestly, we have funding from all different. We have a lot of funding from the state. We have funding from Gates Foundation. We've gotten funding from other foundation money. I work internationally. I'm on a grant in Belgium. It's a small thing, but it's looking very appealing.
No, it matters.
Travel internationally.
It matters to you.
But it matters. It's really important work because it's not just I get to go cool places sometimes and drag my poor children along who complain about that because they're adolescents. But it's more like, you can actually talk about the great work that other people are doing around the world and figure out how to have an impact on kids everywhere. I mean, that to me is really rewarding, and that's why we care about like having this measure we developed that's free, that's used around the world in 31 languages, and people will say, well, is this going to work over here? And I'm like, I have no idea. You should test that. Like, try it out, translate it. It's pretty straightforward, and see if it works for you. It's similar with our intervention. We have it in a number of different countries. And I don't know. It has to be adapted. Try it out. See if it works.
Okay, so we're looking for other questions, and I'll give some advice too of myself. I'm this Veronica when I was in a big lab as well, and offering to volunteer to shadow someone write a grant and helping out with all the clerical, boring stuff. You have to be like helping with whatever you can, and just to get to see the process. The person that I volunteered with was very successful at NIH grants. She started her workday at 4:00 in the afternoon and worked until 3 in the morning. So if I wanted to shadow her, that's what I did. So I had my regular job, and then I shadowed her writing a grant, and you learn so much, and they're so hard on you, and they're like, not that. You just learn so much watching someone else who's successful put together their grant and just offering to volunteer your time because there's no funding yet to help out in any way you can.
Amazing experience.
Any questions from our audience? Again, these are 3 very successful and talented and willing to share their experience with you faculty members. I know. I'm so excited to hear all of you.
We never answered the second part of Molly's question.
Okay.
We can take that.
Go for it. Yeah, and then I have a follow-up question. Go for it.
That was around interdisciplinary. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No, I think that is so important now. If you look at like the big problems that we're trying to address, you have to work in this sort of team science approach. But for students, you still need to have your expertise, right? So you're training, you're taking courses, you're learning. You still need to have your area, right? You need to be an expert and contribute in a specific area. I see way too often now people try to jump over that and start doing everything before they know, okay, this is what I'm contributing to this team, right? This is my expertise. These are my skills. This is my content area, whatever it is. And then start building those bigger teams to answer some of those bigger questions.
I think if you're curious, if you really kind of do your homework and you become develop your track record, and then you're curious, right? And you want to find a friend and work with good people. I think that is really fun and exciting because then it expands the work you do, and you have really good, cool grad students. And the grad students honestly are like, well, I want to go look at kids who physical activity. I'm like, oh, I have no idea about that. Go find somebody. It led to some really, really cool stuff that I never would have done if my grad students hadn't showed me, And so being open, I think, to that and curious. And then I'm also going to say one more thing that Veronica said I want to add to. I cannot say how important it is to do, not like we want you to all do grunt work, because that's not what I'm saying, but I have to say, no, but you do. I mean, no one did my first budget for my big grant. I had a $1.5 or something $1 million grant. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea. Zero idea. And I had to learn how to do my budget myself. And the poor research office, they were so annoyed with me because I had no idea. And so it was back and forth 20 times because I was like, I don't know what that means. But I'll tell you something. No one knows my budgets better than me now. I mean, I manage $20 million in funding right now. And I know my budgets. And it's a little dangerous. Honestly, I know enough to be a little dangerous sometimes. And I'm like, we have a budget person who thankfully is amazingly awesome and incredible and is responsible for, I feel like, so much of the work that we've been able to get funded. And I'll say, so I tinkered with this a little bit. And, I can see her just rolling her eyes, but she's too nice to do that. And I'm like, I'm not sure if this is helpful or not. But I will say that, having to do that stuff yourself, oh, my gosh, is so important. So useful. Anyway. Yeah.
There are resources to help you learn, yes. I will say there are resources.
There are now. There were not when I started. Are you kidding?
But you learn so much by doing. I would say, you can read all about NIH grants. You can watch videos. There is those tutorials we could post to. but helping some, like watching, like doing formatting bio sketches. That's what I did as a grad student, formatting everyone's bio sketch for every NIH grant.
Oh my
You learn a lot about how to sell and write a bio sketch. I cannot put that down as a, I mean, so doing it, helping out any pieces, you will learn so much from those pieces.
I mean, you're going to roll your eyes and be like, oh my God, I'm only doing the crap work. But I'll tell you what, I learned a lot about all that. And now I know when if you've lived it, you could be like, I realize this is not the fun part when you're entering your own data. And I'm so sorry. I really need you to get experience in all aspects of a research project. That's my sales pitch.
Allison, did you want to add anything?
It's bringing back memories of when I was a doctoral student at Carolina, and my mentor, Kurt, made me manage the budget. This might have been the first grant that I worked on. It was from the state, and we were developing software. But this, bless her, a lady named Lily Topol was like, you have got to be kidding me that I'm not working with the PI. I am working with the graduate student. She called the person who was in charge of the finances and was like, Allison Myers has gone rogue. It was the first time that I was accused of going rogue. And Kurt was like, she's perfectly capable of managing the budget. I have asked her to do that. She has not gone rogue. But yeah, so anyway, maybe bug your PI if you can. I don't know.
And Molly, did you want to add any resources specifically that you'd want to point out to?
The grant
I'm gonna
writing
pat you to
class.
Grant writing class.
Well, you guys can talk about this too. But we do have good resources for students as well as postdocs and across the discipline. But there's courses, and you can always enroll in courses in different disciplines. But there's doctoral grant writing, I forget, 620, that teaches you NIH-based funding from one of our most successful NIH funders, Dave Dallas. So you will learn from somebody who is very, very successful, and it's going to teach you the mechanics of it. We also have resources in our College of Health, as do all colleges, with an Associate Dean's Office of Research that includes amazing people like Catherine Clevenger, CJ, who helps us with the budgets, because when I got here and saw that they wanted us to do it themselves, I threw a diva fit. Like, I'm out of here. No, we don't like.
Molly.
We
Yeah.
need you, Molly. She
Yeah.
fights
The
good
diva.
fight.
But it is also about knowing your own discipline. So I am glad you spoke to that too, because I think it does start with yourself. And I think Aspire is actually a great example of interdisciplinary research, because who would have put the four of us in the same NIH grant, getting Allison her first NIH tagline?
It's even better than RO1 because it's a center grant.
Yeah.
Was it really?
Yes.
That was my first NIH grant.
Yeah. Are there other questions from the audience while we're having time here? I'm looking around. But there's an advanced research design methods class at the MPH level. And health promotion, we have a grant writing class out in the fall by Dr. Mojica, and that focuses on. Advanced research design is H615. Research design in the fall is I'm sorry, the health promotion grant writing class escapes me the number off the top of my head, but there are definitely classes that are going on here on campus.
And I think we can we can do these kinds of presentations. I've taught an advanced professional development class in HDFS when there's that option and availability, and it talks a lot about specific aims and different kinds of grants and different kinds of jobs and preparing your CV and your research statement and teaching statement if you're going into academia or other kinds of non-academic positions. And so just even if that kind of class isn't available at the time, being able to ask, advocate for that if you're a graduate student and say, hey, we'd like to have a presentation on those things. I was just talking to our incoming grad students, our new grad students yesterday about tell someone. And if you want that kind of presentation, happy to do it. People are happy to do it. We can't always teach it because we have other classes we have to, teach, but we can always, figure something out.
So for our panelists, what are some ideas you have for either reframing right now grants, pivoting, or looking for other sources? What are some suggestions you have for our audience today? Reframing, pivoting, staying the course, new sources? Dr.
We talked
Myers.
a lot in Extension. The Extension Service serves, I don't know, I think it's 90,000 youth. I can't remember. It's a lot. It's 5 digits worth of youth around the state. And many of them they come from all backgrounds, and we've had to worry about sort of protecting them and keeping them safe now. And we talk a lot about protecting the work. And protecting the work, which I would include like undoing health disparities, is the work that our team does as well, means that we have had to talk about it differently. And it also means that we've internally then you have a conversation with yourself about whether you're compromising your values if you scrub the words diversity, equity, or inclusion from your work. And where I have landed for today in the ongoing conversation with myself is that I am protecting the work. The other part of that, and I think it's important for all of us as a land-grant university, right? We do have a mission to serve the state. We serve everyone, period, full stop. We serve all Oregonians. And so talking about it that way has been helpful for us. Increasing access is federal law, civil rights law, and other laws to programs that are funded with federal dollars. And so I don't know, I'm trying to lean on what is longstanding, and instead of getting caught up in the chaos. I don't know if that helps.
I think everybody wants to improve kids' outcomes. Like for the work I do, I don't know any parent that doesn't want their kid to be successful, honestly. And so if you really focus on how can we do good science that can actually improve kids' outcomes? How can we do work that's translatable and scalable and actually makes a difference for kids? Like that is what we need to focus on. And I think the more creative you can be about diversifying where you look for funding, because people care about that. Across the aisle, people care about that. Everybody wants their kids to be happy and successful and do well. And we don't want to be last in the world on whatevers, right? We all want our kids to be successful. And so how do we talk about the impact of the work, right? If you actually have something that's demonstrated that, like in one of our studies, you have to talk about it really carefully, not carefully. What I mean is translate what you're doing into real world. I mean, we had a paper that was in the New York Times, and the reason it got in the New York Times was because Alan Aycock, who I'm going to lunch with next, is retired now, but it's all on him. He said, well, actually, this result shows that kids who have strong attention and persistence at age 4 have nearly 50% greater odds of finishing college by the time they're 25. I could have just talked about the odds ratio. And instead, what he said was, the odds ratio is blah, blah, blah. He goes, but actually, you know what that means? And I'm like, no, actually. What does that mean, Alan? And he goes, what that means is that nearly 50% of kids who are strong at age 4 have, you know what I mean? Like they have a better chance, they're more likely to graduate university. Holy moly, that's a big thing. Or us being able to put our effects into how much learning increases does that look like for a kid? In our intervention, we're able to say that, wow, the kids who were randomly assigned and got our intervention, which is like a light touch thing that you do twice a week for 30 minutes, okay, in a preschool setting, okay, that are music and movement games that are cognitively complex, okay, they're fun and engaging. Those kids in 6 months made a year's improvement in math skills in 6 months, okay? The kids that were learning English, okay, those kids made a 23-point gain in their math in 6 months. That is important to translate because that means something. And if at the end of the day we all care about kids doing better, I don't care where you're from or who you are, okay? Everybody cares about that. Then you need to better translate the work you do into that. And in order for me to be able to say that, I had really hardcore, rigorous designs I was doing, okay? And I have to be really good at like being true to the science on it so I can actually say with confidence, this is what we're finding, okay? And I've controlled in random assignment, I've controlled for all other measured and unmeasured things, right? So anyway, I'll shut up.
I did not diversify. I am not diversified.
Oh, gosh.
And so, I mean, I think these problems are not going away, right? The impacts of like what we study in public health, the impacts of climate change, those problems are not going away. And so it is, how do we keep doing the work? And so that is finding other means of funding or doing things that don't require funding to keep the work moving forward. And so it is having those internal discussions about what are you comfortable with and how do you keep things moving forward. And so right now I'm having conversations with a pharma company about doing climate change adaptation research. I never would have thought I would take funding from a pharma company, but that is now on the table because I think the research is important to do to keep it moving forward. So diversify, that's what I'm trying to do right now.
So I like to, oh, Allison, please, Dr. Morris.
A little bit of a provocative question because I know you can handle it. Have you talked with the agricultural community about helping you respond to severe weather?
I have not.
I think there's an opportunity there.
Totally.
See what I did there?
That's right. Made a connection. Yeah. Diversify. Great. Well, I would like to just take the time to thank our panelists for joining us today, for sharing. Thank you. I think we'll, and we're really, I know, this was a great panel, just to hang out here and talk. I'm certainly happy to answer some of your questions. We also have another panel coming up next month from our community partners. Dr. McClellan's going to be our moderator, but we're going to have 3 community partners talking about their funding approaches, agencies they write to, and their strategies to getting regional and community-based funding. It'll also be here in person with lunch provided. We'll also be, again, live streamed and recorded. So please join us on April 10th for this next group of panelists. And before you leave, if you know me, I teach the evaluation class. We are trying to do some evaluation metrics from this webinar or this presentation. There's a QR code here with a very short survey from the Beeves link, maybe 5-item questions. Would you please take this very short survey for us? And we would really be interested in learning other types of sessions you would like us to host. We are very looking forward for we have sessions coming up in April and May, but looking for more sessions for the summer and the fall. So please provide us your input. And again, thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon.